Hello, you're listening to Learn Japanese Pod, and you're listening to the Fun Friday edition of the podcast, where we talk to interesting people doing cool things in Japan. And I am joined by my dear friend, Matthew. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Alex.
And also, Ben is sitting in the corner.
Good afternoon.
And it's a hot summer's day. We are hanging out in Matthew's beautiful tatami room. So Matthew lives out in actually, not Tokyo.
It is Tokyo.
It is Tokyo.
I spend my whole life telling people this is Tokyo.
This is Tokyo. I'm sorry.
So we actually passed through Kanagawa to get here.
Right.
But we're in Tokyo.
We're in Tokyo. So we are actually in Tokyo. I stand corrected. And as some of you long-time listeners might know, that Matthew has appeared on the podcast before. Matthew has been a dear friend for many years and also a supporter of the podcast in many ways. One time helping us to rebuild the website when we got hacked, which was good. I remember that. That was
fond
good
memories. Yes.
Fond memories. But Matthew, for people who maybe don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in Japan?
So I'm what is known as a lifer. That does not mean I'm serving a life sentence for some crime. It means I'm in Japan for good. So I think I've probably been here for 15 years now. Previously, I had lived here for maybe a year and a half, which we shall talk about shortly. And I am very, very enthusiastic about Japan. It's a wonderful place to live.
Yes.
And I'm a bit suspicious of people who know about Japan but don't live here. So
I
isn't that
think,
a bit odd?
I think in our internet connected world and our social media connected world, it's easy to make a video about something you don't know. Because why put all the time and effort into learning about something when you can just say you know about it? Right, there you go. That's why I started Learn Japanese Pod. In fact, my motto is, we don't do this because it's easy. We do this because we thought it would be easy. But never mind. But anyway, so I was just chatting to Matthew earlier, and I was coming to hang out with him. He said, we should record a podcast. What do you want to record a podcast about? And we were kind of racking our brains. And then Matthew came up with a really good idea, which was...
So all about doing a Japanese homestay, visiting like a Japanese family home. What are the do's and don'ts? How does it all work?
That's such a brilliant topic because, one, I actually don't know much about it because I haven't done it myself. And two, we haven't even touched that topic on the podcast before. So I think this is a great topic. Matthew, you are a podcasting genius. I think we should probably start off with what is a homestay as far as you understand it in the context of Japan?
So for me, a homestay is often when you don't have enough money to rent an apartment.
Right.
And you find a welcoming Japanese family who allow you to live with them, often for free in exchange, typically in exchange for teaching English. Obviously, we're from the UK, and in the UK, like most of Europe, there's this culture of having an au pair, which au pair just means like with us or something.
Yeah,
right?
something like that.
Yeah. So as an au pair, you would live with a family, usually without a salary, and you're being paid in kind. So you would look after the kids, do some cleaning and that kind of thing. In Japan, that's less common from what I've heard, but I did a homestay. I lived with a Japanese family for 3 months, and they very kindly let me live with them, and in exchange I taught them English, and it was fantastic, and I highly recommend it.
And before we get into the details of the nitty-gritty of doing the homestay and your experiences, who do you think a homestay would benefit? Who is it usually best for?
So we usually associate it with younger people. I'm obviously old now, but I was youngish. I guess I was early 20s
Yeah.
when I did it. I think it's really important that you are an easygoing person, because wherever you're from, Japan is very different. So it's very suitable if you're easygoing, if you're maybe outgoing, because, for example, you need to get conversation going with very limited English on the side of the host family. And I think it's also really good for someone who wants to see the real Japan. I guess something we should point out right from the outset is that it's not unusual to live in Tokyo and almost never go to a Japanese family home.
Yes,
I mean, that's really because in metropolitan areas of Japan, we socialize in restaurants and cafes and parks. It's quite a big deal to be invited to someone's house. It's not like a casual thing. It's kind of quite a big thing. And even for young people, a lot of young people have tiny apartments and feel much more comfortable meeting up in a cafe. So it's not weird if you find someone who's lived in Tokyo for quite a few years and has never been in a family home.
Absolutely. Thing. Yeah, it's an exception to the rule, isn't it?
I mean, when did you last visit I know you come here relatively often, not often enough, bearing in mind you live just a very short distance away,
I must say I am a terrible friend, and I do need to visit you more, Matthew. Yeah.
Can I say I live in Kyoto and I've visited more times here than Alex in recent months.
In recent years.
Guilty as charged. I'm sorry.
But yeah, so you probably haven't had much time in Japanese people's houses. I haven't had a lot, but
yeah. So through the girlfriend's family, a little bit, but other than that, if I wasn't dating her, I wouldn't have much chance to actually hang out in a Japanese person's home. And again, you're absolutely right. It's a somewhat rare experience. And I'm sure if you're a tourist coming to Japan, Tokyo, it's probably unlikely it's set foot in someone's house. Yeah.
And it is, Japan is a very, very, very welcoming country. However, you shouldn't take things for granted. So there is an etiquette. And if you make even a small effort to follow the etiquette, people here will be deeply appreciative. So maybe we could go through some do's and don'ts.
Let's jump into that. Yeah. So and I think there's this kind of there's this image of Japan that the culture is impenetrable because they are Japanese and you are Western or from somewhere else, and it seems very intimidating. But I think once you get here, there are some rules that you can follow that maybe make your life and actually your Japanese friends and host families' lives easier. So what would you say about etiquette?
Well, I mean, just continue your point. I think it's really valid that, it seems impenetrable, but a lot of it, when you get used to it, really does make sense. I mean, of course, a lot of the sort of etiquette rules are to do with not having a lot of space, being quite crowded, not having a lot of privacy. So that there's things where you sort of behave as if you can't see someone because that's the etiquette. And it's because of not having privacy. So we have to kind of pretend we have privacy.
Right. Yeah.
And then also a lot of the etiquette is just about kind of acknowledgement and taking things seriously.
Yes.
And for Tokyo, a lot of the etiquette comes from this weird thing of people in Tokyo are not from Tokyo. And they don't want to look unsophisticated.
So, just to expand on that point, I don't know what percentage of the population living in Tokyo was born in Tokyo.
I think maybe around half or something.
So, maybe half or maybe more than half of people who live in Tokyo were actually born outside of Tokyo.
Yeah, so there's this big thing of trying not to look unsophisticated, not look like a country bumpkin.
Right.
So that extends to, for example, when I ask people, why don't you hang out at each other's houses? They say things like, well, I might not be able to take care of the guests well and they might feel uncomfortable. Or a classic thing that is very pertinent when you're visiting families is you give a gift, they are very grateful, very appreciative, and put it away without opening it.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, that's happening a bit less, but it's still a thing that,
Yeah.
and the idea is that you don't open a gift in front of the person in case you somehow give away in your face that it's not what you want. And then everyone, so there's a lot of things like that in Japan where you're being careful not to kind of hurt people's feelings, I guess.
Yes.
So, for example, with gift giving, with the giving and receiving of any physical objects in Japan, we typically do it with two hands.
Yes. Yeah.
And
right.
that can be as simple as if you're in a supermarket buying something, you should try and hand over your credit card, for example, with two hands, which can be quite tricky when you have like a basket of shopping in one hand. So that kind of thing. So as I said, gift giving is an important part of Japanese culture, the presentation of the gift. So you should look at the person, hand it to them with two hands. The gift should be wrapped. Ideally, it should be in a bag as well. So it's quite common in Japan that you will give a gift to someone in the shopping bag that it came with,
Yes,
which I find
yes.
quite weird, but it's like, particularly if it's a Oshale department store.
Yeah, no, if I think part of that is, you go to like a nice department store and you've got the department store, bag, and it shows you went out of your way to go to a nice place. I guess it's something to do with that. And definitely, I guess, people might be listening to this conversation thinking, what, do I have to give a gift every day? Does it have to be expensive? Well, definitely maybe on the first day of your homestay. I think that's probably the minimum, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, if you're arriving from abroad, you're thinking, what's a good gift? I have to say that basically the cheesier the better. Essentially, what would a tourist buy in your hometown? That's perfect. Absolutely.
So, like,
perfect.
if you're from France, maybe a pink plastic Eiffel Tower.
Exactly. Yeah. Anything with pictures on of exactly scenes of Paris, like with the sights of Paris. Maybe a poster or a cloth you hang on the wall. That kind of thing is ideal.
Unperishable snacks.
Yeah.
I mean, generally, if you're not quite sure what to get someone as a gift, generally, non-perishable goods such as snacks, sweets, things like that are perfect. So,
and just kind of a related thing, if you're giving a gift to a group of people, not so much a family, but let's say you come here and you're doing, you have a job or an internship or something lined up. Really essential thing is that if you bring snacks or whatever, they should be individually wrapped. So in Japan, everything is individually wrapped, to a ridiculous extent. But this is ideal because you can, give a box of cookies to the boss of the company, and he or she is going to divide them amongst the staff to take home. Whereas in England, if you buy cookies, for example, they're not generally individually wrapped.
They're just in one bag. And once you open them, you've got to eat all of them.
Exactly, Right. So that kind of thing. Herbal tea goes down really well here. Again, if it's a company, things like small cosmetics are really good. Kind of European cosmetics.
Yeah, right.
Or skin cream, and they can be very, very small because it's the gift. It's the act of gift.
It's the act of giving the gift. It's the thought that counts, and so you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money. Yeah, absolutely.
So gift giving is important, and I give a lot of gifts in Japan. It's something I do a lot, and I don't see it as a chore. I see it as it sets everything off well. Yeah. I just think, I've come and I brought a gift, and it's a good way to start things.
It's a great way to build relationships with people.
Yeah. Other obvious do's. Well, I say obvious do's and don'ts. I mean, the things like in Japan, we don't wear our shoes in the house.
Yeah, take your shoes off.
In other countries, we do. And the general rule is that you look out for a step, like wherever you are. If there's a kind of a step, and often some shoes around, or possibly a shallow cupboard, that's going to be full of shoes. And that's the indication of, this is a place you take off your shoes. So in Japan, we have this word genkan. And genkan, I forget the kanji, but it means like hidden barrier or something, doesn't it? Genkan.
Yeah.
What was the kanji?
Yeah, I'm not sure what gen is, but kan is like, barrier.
Barrier.
Yeah.
It's the same kan as like Kanto and Kansai, right? So east of the barrier,
or
west of the
boundary or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So it was when there was a division in the daimyo time, right?
Oh, interesting.
So genkan has this meaning of hidden barrier. And of course, in a big house, there'd be multiple genkans because there'd be areas where the staff went and areas which like the family went. So there are multiple genkans.
Which is essentially an entrance to somewhere.
Yeah, and it's essentially going to be a step.
It's a
like,
step.
That's
You
how
step up.
You
step up to it. Yeah, right.
So this is a real key indication that you're going to take your shoes off. I think one thing that really makes sense when you're either in Japan is that you act conservatively and you focus on listening and copying.
Yes.
You watch what other people are going to do.
Yeah.
So I mean, for me, my Japanese was appalling, and my reading Japanese level is quite low as well. So a lot of time, if I go to a public bath, for example, an onsen, I'm going to be able to understand like 50% of the signs. So a lot of it is just you watch what other people do and work out what they're doing and copy.
Sure.
So you might have, for example, talk about the shoes. You take off your shoes when you go into the house, and usually the host is going to indicate some slippers that you wear. But then things like when you're using the restroom, they'll often have what are called toilet slippers.
Yeah. Right.
And this is a key thing to like show that the restroom's being occupied. So you'll go there, take off your slippers, put on the toilet slippers, go in. So that things like that you just really need to watch out for, because it's very easy to like, if you go and use the restroom without using the toilet slippers, the host family might be quite confused. Like, has a stranger sneaked into our house? And I'm talking from experience. This This happened because, of course, when I arrived with my host family, I didn't have particularly huge feet, but considerably bigger than standard Japanese feet. So there were no slippers in the house that fitted me and that kind of thing. There's obviously etiquette, or not obvious, but there is etiquette around eating, and the kind of cliche you hear abroad is not having your chopstick stuck in the food. Well, actually, first of all, that's only for white rice, really. And that's because it's part of a funeral offering.
Yeah,
right. That you present a bowl of white rice, because white rice has this meaning of like purity and purification.
Let me try to illustrate the image in your minds, as this is an audio podcast. Like, imagine a bowl of rice, and you have two chopsticks basically stuck into them.
Yeah, and this is an offering at a shrine in for a traditional Japanese funeral. Yeah. So that would be quite rude to do in a restaurant or something.
And not passing food with your chopsticks to someone else.
So that's much more serious. And again, it's very easily done because if you're you go out with the host family, or your host family cooks for you, and maybe there may be many small dishes on the table, and you're serving yourself, you're passing food to each other. So passing food from chopsticks to chopsticks, that's a more serious taboo, really.
Yeah, it's not good.
And again, it's a funeral thing because
it's reminiscent of a funeral. Yeah.
Because we pass the bones from person to person, right? Which I have done, and
it's part of the funeral rites. Have
you been to a Japanese funeral?
Yeah. And they have a my mind's blanking when you cremation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And they have these kind of ceremonial chopsticks where they move the remains using these chopsticks, and so if you hand food to someone else with chopsticks, it's reminiscent of that. It's a very taboo thing. I guess you should just offer the plate, right?
Exactly.
And then they take it with their own chopsticks.
A third aspect of chopsticks etiquette, and again, this is easily done if you don't know to look out for it, is you shouldn't push a dish with your chopsticks.
Yeah, right.
And there's often like trays with many small dishes, and it's a very natural thing to do.
Right.
Another one is you shouldn't gesture with chopsticks.
Yep.
that seems quite rude. And it, in particular, I think if you come from a culture where you gesture a lot, let's say you're one of our Italian friends, again, it could be quite easy to do. Another thing, and again, very relevant to a host family situation where you have communal dishes, you're not meant to like hover with your chopsticks over a communal dish, choosing like the tasty morsel to get. That's seen as a rude thing.
Well, the other one I see sometimes, I don't see everyone do this, is what they'll do is when they take food from the communal dish, they'll
flip around the chopsticks.
They'll flip around the chopsticks, and they'll use the back end of the chopsticks that you don't use for eating, which stops, I guess, what we would call in the West double dipping, right? So you're not touching the food with something that's touched your mouth.
So some restaurants, particularly Korean restaurants, will often have a long pair of chopsticks for serving.
Yeah, right.
But restaurants that don't have that, then flipping around. And there are other things that are not really chopstick etiquette, but you do like it when you have waribashi, so disposable chopsticks. When you split them apart, you rub them together. This isn't etiquette. This is just to stop you getting a splinter in your mouth.
Yeah, right.
For a non-Japanese, you might think that's some weird thing they're doing, but it's just very practical that sometimes if you split apart wooden chopsticks, there might be a big splinter.
Right.
So there's that kind of etiquette around meals. An interesting one that you see in a lot of guidebooks is the thing of like, Japanese people don't blow their nose in public. And it's not that that's considered rude, it's that the Japanese person doing it would consider it embarrassing. So typically, and I quiz a lot of Japanese people on this because there's just something I'm particularly curious about. So one thing that I notice is that now particularly Japanese young people will blow their nose in public, but they'll always turn right away from the table, for example. Japanese women, even young women, will often tend to put a hand in front of their mouth when laughing. Which you see a lot in old movies, but I've noticed still do it, particularly young Japanese women doing it. I mean, staying in a host family, it's really a case of watching what they do. They'll tell you things, but there are things that they won't tell you because it just doesn't occur to them. So, for example, now we're in a Japanese room. We don't wear slippers on the tatami.
Yeah.
Right. So we're in a Japanese room. We're actually in a tea ceremony room. Called what do you call it?
Chashitsu.
Chashitsu. Yeah. So when you go into a tatami room, you have bare feet, or what the Brits used to call stockinged feet. So bare feet or socks. You do not wear the slippers on tatami.
Right.
And that's a practical thing because it potentially damages the tatami. So that kind of thing where a Japanese host family just might not mention that. Now, often in Japan, when you do stay with a Japanese family, you're often going to be in a tatami room. Because many Japanese family houses, they have a single Japanese style room, a tatami room, which will typically be on the ground floor. It will have a shelf, a very low shelf called what's it called, a takuma? I would know this.
What's it called?
Tokonoma.
Tokonoma, yeah.
So tokonoma is a very low shelf in an alcove, and this is part of a traditional Japanese room. This is where the family shrine would be placed. So typically Japanese families will have one tatami room in the house, which is used as a guest room. It may be there for when grandparents come to stay. So you might, my host family, I stayed in their tatami room. There was a family shrine with photos of dead relatives. And yeah, there was an etiquette. So things like the rooms will have shutters on the windows called amado. And really, most Japanese families, as soon as it's sundown, they shut the amado. Now, I had no idea about this. They didn't mention it because for them it was just obvious. But one day, the host daughter was sort of, she was listing complaints about me, and one of them was that I didn't shut the amado when the sun set. Okay. But again, it's a very practical thing because often Japanese houses don't have much of a yard or garden around them.
Yeah.
And if it's nighttime, you've got the lights on.
People can
You're
see
very visible from
right,
the street.
right.
It's a very practical thing.
Sure.
But they didn't think to mention it because, as far as they knew, every house in the world had
That's just
shutters,
what you do.
and you'd close
That's just
at
what you do, yeah.
sunset. Similar things like, again, I said it's quite a big deal visiting someone's house. So most Japanese families, if you're doing a homestay, they wouldn't really be comfortable with you bringing someone to the house, particularly when they're not there. They might not even be comfortable with you asking, like, could a guest come for dinner or whatever. And a lot of that is, it's not that they're being unwelcoming, it's that they feel they wouldn't be able to, like, satisfy the guest's needs.
Right.
As Westerners, we are physically big, but we also take up more personal space around us. I mean, I don't know how you are, but I always kind of cringe when my parents come and visit in Japan and I just see how much space they take up on a train or whatever.
Right.
Just because of how much space we usually take up. Whereas, in Japan, we're very, very used to being in close proximity to people.
And self-contained, right?
Self-contained, self-aware.
And also, I think I've made this point before on the podcast, as it's more of a group-oriented culture. It's not so much who you are as an individual, but what you or how you benefit the group.
Yeah.
And part of that is being self-contained and aware of your surroundings and not taking up a bunch of space and not being loud and noisy.
Yeah, exactly.
Japanese people are human beings, so obviously there are many exceptions to this, but generally the rule is you respect the group society and all that kind of stuff. But just going back to the very first point, one of the very first points you made, which was if all of this sounds overwhelming, which it might if you've never been to Japan and this is all new information for you, don't be. Simply, when in doubt, just copy what people around you are doing.
Yeah.
And I think if you go in with with some level of humility and respect for people, and you're somewhat polite, you can't really go wrong, I think. And any cultural faux pas is usually laughed off, unless you do something really horrible, but it's generally okay.
Yeah, I mean, there are things you can do that do cause trouble. Like, let's say, for example, you didn't understand the bathing etiquette.
Yeah, right.
In Japan, we wash before we get in the bath. Again, a very practical reason, because usually the bath water is shared by all members of the family.
So you don't want dirty bodies getting in that water.
And also you don't want soap suds and stuff in the water. So again, if you didn't know this, as a guest, you're often going to be offered the first bath of the evening.
Yeah, right.
So if you don't know this and you're like putting on your shampoo and your conditioner in the bath, and then, the next member of the family goes in and it's soapy water, or even, maybe you let the water out of the bath and you don't realize that, it takes 25 minutes to fill and costs quite a lot. So things like that where, if what you're doing might have a knock-on effect, you should double check. Watch carefully. Like I said, they're incredibly forgiving people here. But you do want to be a bit careful. Now, if you're, let's say you are working or doing an internship and your host family is an employee's family of the company or the boss's family even, then you want to be ultra careful. So things like, in conversation, there's the standard taboos that, we shouldn't really talk about money or religion, politics. Those kind of sensitive subjects is probably worth avoiding.
That actually, what you're talking about is if you're doing a homestay and they're a member of a company and it's the company you're working, or something like that.
That kind of thing.
There's this thing called rentai sekinin, which means collective responsibility. I learned this the hard way when I first went to Tokyo as an exchange student, and I lived in the dormitory on the university campus. And a friend of mine came to visit and parked his bike outside the dormitory. There was a space there, but it wasn't designated parking. So he I guess it was, although it was private grounds and it wasn't illegal, he shouldn't have parked there. And the head of the dormitory got really angry at me and gave me a big telling off. And what I didn't understand was, why are you shouting at me? I didn't, It wasn't my bike. I didn't park it there. I didn't know the rule. He says, it's your friend.
Yeah.
So what you do, if you are a member of a group, you have to be really, 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 I mean, you might be, you're staying at someone's house, or you're living in a dormitory, or you're a member of a company, or maybe you're part of a karate group. If you do something bad, it reflects badly on everyone. And it's super embarrassing and shameful if you do that.
So a very typical mundane example would be you're doing your homestay. A couple of friends just want to see where you're staying. And, one evening you say, oh, why don't you get off at my stop and let's just walk and I'll show you what the house. And you're talking loudly in the street after dark. Maybe a neighbour's going to mention that the next day to the host family, not in a vindictive way, but just like, oh, there was a lot of loud talking by Westerners last night, and it reflects badly on the family.
They look bad in the community.
Yeah,
right.
And it's like just a difficult, icky situation. So you do want to be aware of that kind of thing.
And the language they'll use is very, very understated. So maybe in the West they'll say, you're out of order, you crossed the line, what you did was terrible. In Japan they'll say something like, I was a little surprised to see that you did so and so.
Yeah, and what they mean is you're out of order. That was terrible.
And you wouldn't pick up on it. You might think it's not a big deal. It's a big deal if it's mentioned. Yeah.
Another thing about conversation. Well, a couple of things. So first of all, just on a practical level, it's worth learning things that you're completely uninterested in about your own country, because Japanese people may be fascinated and very inquisitive. So, for example, you were a JET, right?
Yeah.
You were
A
JET.
You're on the JET program.
One of the things that I didn't do JET. So JET is Japan English Teaching. It's a program it's actually run by local government in Japan, where you place a native speaker English teacher at some typically high schools or junior high schools or elementary school. And one of the things many JETs say, particularly the Brits, is, they arrived, they were like being introduced or whatever, and then they were asked to sing the national anthem.
Yeah.
And of course, as Brits, we don't know our national anthem. We wouldn't consider singing it. It has some quite negative connotations, I think, for some people, culturally, for some people.
I think British people display their nationalism by not being nationalist.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So there might be many things like that where you're quizzed on the British royal family.
There's a good exercise I like to do that might prepare you for questions that you might not expect. And that is, if you have a question about Japanese society, for example, one common one is, why do Japanese people wear masks? And so what you want to do is just flip the question. And the question is, well, why don't most British people wear masks?
Yeah.
And just think about that, even though it might be obvious why your culture does something, but try to come up with an answer for that. So all these questions, it's like, Japanese people use chopsticks. Why don't you use chopsticks? Or that's not a good example, but think of that,
I think related to that, it's really important that you don't ask a question again. You really have to notice when someone gives you a ridiculous answer.
They don't want to talk about it.
They don't, or they don't know, or so particularly the why question. Like for me, the main thing I want to know is why. And in the West particularly, we often ask several questions to reach a conclusion. But in Japan, you ask the question, there's the answer, that's it.
Yeah.
Even if the answer is ridiculous, don't
push it. Don't
push it,
because when you ask a question, you get a seemingly ridiculous answer. It may be because, as you said, they don't know, or they don't want to talk about it. And if you keep pushing it, I think you're being overbearing.
Yeah, and or they might feel they need to be defensive.
Yeah, they'll get defensive. Yeah, right.
And particularly if it's a sensitive topic, like why is the suicide rate so high in Japan?
It's maybe not.
And people might say, "Oh, a lot of work-related stress." Don't then say, "Well, actually, I know in Germany there's high levels of work-related stress and low levels of." So don't dig into it because they've given you the answer.
And also remember that the question that you think the question that you think you're asking is not going to be the question that they hear.
Sure.
So classic one was when I was many, many, many years ago when I taught English. One of the questions to try and get a conversation going is like, you've only got one day to live. What would your last meal be? Now, my interpretation of that question, what I'm really asking is, imagine the most delicious, exorbitant, fantastic food you can. And the answer that came back is, I would eat rice. And that sounded ridiculous to me, but they're not interpreting it in the same way. So what's the last meal you would eat? Well, of course you'd eat rice because you're purifying yourself before you go into the next.
And also in Japanese culture, there's this idea that if you haven't eaten rice, you haven't eaten.
Yes.
I mean, that's why we use the word gohan for food, right? Yeah. Which means, and go is the honorable. Honorific prefix.
Yeah.
So, if the shoe is on the other foot, again, like we're often not going to be able to answer why questions about.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, as Brits, so
why are the trains always late?
Yeah, but I mean, the number one question Brits are asked all over the world is, why do you have two taps in your sinks?
Yeah, right. I have the same question, by the way.
And the answer is boring, ridiculous, convoluted. It's about legal things, about drinking water having to be a separate piping system because of having a water tank in the roof of the house with dead pigeons in it, and you wouldn't want to be drinking that.
Oh, I see.
There's weird things like this. But it's interesting, but also stupid because they're like, well, you haven't had that kind of plumbing system for the last 50 years. Why do you have the same thing?
I think maybe Ben was saying I think Ben was talking about this. Someone said that one of their Swedish friends was asking him as a Brit, why do you British people keep your water pipes on the outside of the house? Like, don't they freeze? Because obviously in Sweden it gets really cold. It's like having water pipes on the outside is a stupid idea.
Yeah. Why is the British plug the size of a baby's head? It's giant. It's insane. So, if we're pursued on these questions, it does become uncomfortable quite quickly.
Or the other one you'll be asked is, what do you think about Japan? And you've got to be. It's a difficult balancing act because obviously on the one hand you don't want to be like, super rude about Japan, but on the other hand, if you're kind of overly polite or kind of placating them or giving them platitudes, they'll sniff. They'll sniff it out. They'll know that you're BSing them. So you want to give something that's like somewhat true, but obviously not offensive. Well, this guy, I remember these. I was at this bar one time and these two Japanese salarymen who were completely drunk said, "Hey, how's it going?" And we got talking and said, "So what do you think about Japan?" I'm like, "Oh, it's great. Yeah. Well, what do you like about Japan?" I said, "Oh, easy. Like hot springs, Japanese food, culture," and I just reeled off this list. And they didn't look that interesting because I guess they thought I was just
it's like a stock answer almost.
It's just a stock answer. And then the other guy said, "Well, what don't you like about Japan?" And I'm like, "Oh no, what do I say?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if this is something I don't like, but maybe something that could be improved is the work-life balance, perhaps."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What other important points of etiquette? So, again, for Japanese, this is obvious, but just keeping tidy.
Tidy. Yeah.
If you're staying with a host family, just, pack the stuff neatly. When you use something, put it away quickly. So I particularly as a Brit, you might do something in the morning with the intention of clearing up in the afternoon or even evening. That's not something you do in a Japanese household, right? If
You do it straight away.
Yeah. If you prepare a dish in the morning, let's say you prepare breakfast for the host family to show them your British style breakfast or whatever. Yeah. You then clear it up then and there.
Yeah, right.
So you do have to be a bit careful about that. A lot of it is just about taking care of things, not sprawling out everywhere. If there's any communal item, you want to, leave it clean and dry and that kind of thing, and put it in its proper place.
Be respectful of things
exactly.
as well as people. And the other etiquette thing we can just briefly say is be on time. Never be late for anything. There's a phrase in Japanese, moshiwake gozaimasen or moshiwake nai, which literally means, well, it means sorry, but literally it means there is no excuse.
Yeah.
And there is actually no excuse for being late. The train was delayed. It's not an excuse. You're at fault. So in Japan, on time is late. So if you're going to meet someone at 2 p.m. and you turn up exactly on the dot at 2 p.m. I was told off in my last job about this. The customer was expecting me at 2. I turned up at like maybe 1:59 in 30 seconds and I was late. They actually complained. So you need to be 10 minutes before the appointed date. Yeah.
And if there is any issue, it's really important to let people know early, right? So for example, if you can't make an appointment time, it's not cool to turn up 10 minutes late.
Yeah.
You want to, call them, message them, say, I'm so sorry to trouble you. Can we change it? So a lot of this just comes from Japanese people being busy, Japan being crowded, people living in very close proximity without a lot of privacy. So,
and being a very modern society as well.
Yeah. So a lot of the etiquette, as soon as you understand it, it does make a lot of sense. And if you follow it, it just makes everything so smooth.
I think, and again, we don't want you to feel overwhelmed by listening to this like long list of rules.
People here are very welcoming, very forgiving. But if they can see you've tried to make an effort, that really goes a long way.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think in Japan, someone who is at least attempting to make an effort, I think that's really, really valued.
Yeah.
So for example, just as a simple example is like, all you can muster is a konnichiwa, a badly pronounced hello. They appreciate the fact that you bothered to come over to Japan in the first place and that you tried, even though your Japanese might not be good, that you at least attempted to speak the language. And that is seen as a virtue. So, may have failed, but he tried hard. I think that's seen as a virtue in Japan. Definitely.
Yeah, trying hard is a big thing in Japan, and suffering. I think if
suffering
they can see
for
suffering,
yes.
That's a really big thing.
And just to kind of wrap up this podcast, I just want to kind of finally ask you about some of your personal experiences at the homestay, and maybe finally, if someone's interested in doing a homestay, how can they find out more about it?
So,
or how did you find out about it?
So Japan is incredibly welcoming and friendly. Yeah, I'm always surprised at people who turn up here with no connections to Japan. Like wherever you are in the world, there's ways to make. I mean, particularly now we can make connections online so easily. When I first came to Japan, end of 2001. I mean, this was when fast internet access had just been invented, right? ADSL. So, when I was in the UK in the late 1990s, early days of the web, it was more tricky, but it was still very, very doable. So when I was at university, I joined the Japan Society. I did language exchanges with Japanese people, so that, for example, when I wanted to set up a homestay, it was a friend of a friend of a friend. I just went through a small network I'd built up. So I'm always surprised, like when people turn up here, and it's like they don't know people in Japan because they haven't gone out and made those connections. And I mean, you know, you can do a lot to prepare to come to Japan, but just making some connections is more important and more rewarding than anything else.
100%. The very first week I ever came to Japan, it was quite stressful because I didn't understand anyone. I wasn't sure of the food. It was incredibly hot, and I think actually I had food poisoning in my first week, which is actually from the plane, not in Japan. And I was wondering if it was a mistake having come to Japan. And then the moment I started making friends, everything changed. Of course, which is, you won't be surprised to hear that, but like the more friends I made, it just became a million times more enjoyable. And it's not, and some people say that, you know, it's hard to make friends in Japan. I don't think that's true.
You're doing it wrong.
You're doing it wrong. Right.
Like, it's such a friendly, warm country. People here are, I keep using this word, forgiving. People here are extremely forgiving of non-Japanese, and people at every level and part of society. People here are super friendly. You know, people. I personally detest fun, but Japanese people are fun-loving. Right. I dislike nothing more than having fun. But Japanese people here are like, I mean, they love getting together, having fun, doing hanami picnics, doing their bonenkai end of year party.
So drinking parties.
Having a party and then another party, the nijikai.
Nijikai. So yeah, or hashigo. So they're doing a pub crawl.
So personal experiences of the host family. So overall, it was just amazing and wonderful. You know, being able to stay somewhere in exchange for teaching English was really good. I didn't really teach the family much English because they were all working. I mean, my homestay family was a mother and father and a daughter. She was, I think, she was like 21. I was probably 23 or something. She left early in the morning to work. She worked at House, you know, House, the food company.
Oh yeah, right.
Right, they do like curry rice.
Yeah.
That kind of, so we always had lots of House food products. House is like a big Japanese food company. The father worked at a bank. The mother was what we would call an office lady. So they all came back quite late. This was out in Chiba in Funabashi. And I think like the father worked in central Tokyo. The mother worked maybe in Chibashi.
Funabashi is a commuter town, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I was like in a village on the edge of Funabashi. So the first thing is, of course, when I arrived, I had sent a few things over. And when I say a few things, I think I had sent 13 boxes by Yamato Transport because I had my working holiday visa, so I knew I was going to be in Japan for like a year. So even though I didn't think I would be staying many months with the host family, so of course they show me to this Japanese style room, you know, the lovely smell of tatami, and then these 13 boxes of my stuff because I had probably 500 books. I had our listeners won't remember, but there used to be these discs, CDs. I had all these CDs, camping stuff. Like
you just brought too much stuff. Yeah.
Well, no, but I mean a small amount for staying in Japan for a year. So very quickly I realized like, the family is going to be out a lot. So I just had an amazing time wandering around Funabashi, getting to know bits of Tokyo, and you know, there's this weird thing that I kept going back to places I knew because I knew them. So when I first arrived in Tokyo, a friend of a friend took me to Ginza because she said, lots of foreigners like Ginza. Now, Ginza is my idea of hell. A lot of, you know, fashion shops that I have no interest in.
Yeah, lots of brand shops.
But I kept going to Ginza in those first few months because it was
the only thing you knew.
Somewhere I knew. It's like, I could go to Ginza, and I knew like a couple of restaurants there where I had enough Japanese to order.
Ah, cool.
So I'd wander around Ginza and go and eat my curry rice. So yeah, experiences with a host family. There was a lot of trying to teach them some English. That the mother was much more enthusiastic about that. If you're out of Tokyo, you're often going to be like a little bit of a celebrity, even now in 2023, but even more so then. So, I think probably 3 or even 4 times I was walking along the street. I was stopped by a Japanese person who said, do you speak English? Where are you from? And then, can you come and give a talk at my English conversation club? Was a classic one. And this was when I discovered that there were English conversation clubs run by Japanese people who don't speak much English. It consists of Japanese people trying to talk to each other in English, but they bring in guest speakers. And that's always interesting because I kind of enjoyed it, but I never really had much appropriate stuff to say. I tend to say very inappropriate things most of the time, as you know. But of course, I couldn't, particularly when sometimes there'd be a couple of speakers, and invariably one would be a Mormon, right? Because Mormons are a very accessible source of English.
Right.
And I find Mormons very, very pleasant.
Polite people.
Polite.
Very polite.
And very warm and welcoming and open.
Absolutely.
So I was quite surprised at how well I got on with all these Mormons. Really enthusiastic, making it, because of course they're here to recruit people to join their religion. So they're very, very friendly and
outgoing.
Yeah. So that was kind of a surreal thing, and that happened multiple times.
I think if you ever get invited to do a talk on something, you might freak out because so I was on the JET program and they asked me to talk about really random stuff. It's like, can you tell us about the geography of the United Kingdom or tell us about the British Fire Service? I'm like, and I think just turning up is 90% of it.
Yeah,
and then the other 10% is the talk, because you're showing that you're expressing interest in their group, and
they don't know what to expect. So just taking an angle on whatever topic they give you. Yeah. So I happen to be an expert on the British Fire Service, but if I wasn't, I would just take an angle. Now it happens to be a personal interest of mine, so I could talk about the history of firefighting from the Great Fire of London and right. 1950s, there was the big fire in the underground meat market under London, and this was where a lot of firefighters died, and this was when they first introduced protective clothing for firefighters.
Look at you. It's not using any notes.
And this kind of thing. But let's say, obviously it's difficult for me because I have a very, 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 very wide and deep knowledge of almost every subject. But if they did ask me about, if they somehow came up with a topic I didn't know anything about, I would just try and pick an angle that I could somehow relate to something that, I knew about. And talk in that way.
Or the house next door burnt down and you talk about your experience or something like that. Yeah.
And you can always make those kind of things very interactive, where you say a tiny bit and then you go around home like, what do you think?
Yeah, right.
How does this match to your experience?
Actually, one time when I was on the JET program, there were 3 of us were invited to give talks. I'm obviously from the UK, and there were 2 other Jets who were from New Zealand. One of them had been studying Japanese for ages and spoke almost near fluent Japanese. And the other guy, this guy called Matt, his Japanese was terrible. Absolutely, really, really basic stuff. And
it wasn't me, listeners, but another Matt.
Yeah, I was another Matt. And the first speaker, she went and she was giving, the average rainfall in different parts of New Zealand. And it was perfect Japanese and everyone was kind of falling asleep. And then Matt gets up and he goes, I am Maori desu. I am Maori. Haka shimasu. I'll do the haka dance. And he just does the haka dance.
Wow.
And that was it. And everyone woke up this is the coolest thing I've seen in years. And so you don't need to necessarily be very knowledgeable or fluent in Japanese. But I think if you just turn up and you give it an honest try, you'll do well.
Yeah. So, I mean, particularly for Jets, I think that there's this, you can have the feeling that you're meant to be like an ambassador for your country.
Yeah, right.
Which can be difficult if you dislike your country like I do, or or
I think you are an ambassador, regardless of your country, regardless of whether in the JET program or any other organization. You, as a foreigner who stands out in the crowd, if you're doing something that is obviously not cool, and lots of people see it, It's when it's so the problem is that recently, because there's been a massive increase of tourists coming to Japan.
Yeah, waves and waves and waves.
The tiny percentage of tourists who get up to bad stuff increases, and so you see someone who's, I don't know, doing something they shouldn't do, and it kind of makes and it will make the news, and then everyone starts complaining about tourists coming over to Japan. So you are kind of an ambassador.
You remember pre-pandemic, we had issues in the fish market with people like touching fish and stuff.
Fish. Yeah.
And again, like a large tuna is worth thousands of dollars, right? And it's a big deal, and they take food very, very, very seriously. Food poisoning is incredibly rare in Japan.
Because people don't touch the fish.
Yeah. and it's really surprisingly rare when you think of how much raw food we eat here,
right? Or
seared food or whatever. But yeah, it is that real strictness about cleanliness and like this, like a mindo, right? This kind of this Japanese philosophy of caring about the small things and caring about others.
No, it's that idea, if you can't do the small things right, you can't do the big things right as well. It's kind of like the craftsman the craftsman attitude to doing things, which is also why, you go to Japan and you'll find someone who makes the best made bamboo bowls in the whole of Japan or something like that, world class.
And just on the point of etiquette, I'd say if you're going to do something that you haven't done before, try and check with someone to see if there is a proper etiquette. For example, if you're going to go and visit a shrine, let's say you're going to join a little mini group tour within a shrine, you want to find out from someone here, I'm going to visit a shrine next week. Is there anything I should be aware of? Another classic one would be a sumo stable.
Sure.
Right? Because there'll be places you can go and places you're not meant to go. There'll be like bits that the public can look at and bits that they can't. So just stuff like that you want to be careful of.
When I was an exchange student at ICU University, shout out ICU.
Bizarre name for university.
Yeah, it's called International Christian University.
Do you remember ICQ?
No.
That was like a very early chat thing.
Oh, yeah, ICQ.
Because it was ICQ. It was ICQ.
Oh,
ICQ. And there were all these rival chat platforms like AIM, AOL, Internet.
No, ICU, we also thought Isolated Crazy Utopia was another name we had for it. But our professor took us to the sumo stable in, where was it, Ryogoku.
Yeah.
And he said, before you go in, I just want to make you aware, when you go in, you're going to see some pretty tough training that you might think is a bit cruel. Don't say anything. Stay seated. Don't make any sudden movements. Keep quiet for the whole time. So we shuffle in and we sit down, and there's the main sumo guy, and then his deshi, his disciple, and he gets him to charge at him. And as he charges, he does this move apparently called nekodamashi, which means cheating, tricking the cat. And all it is literally you slap them really hard across the face. This guy went flying, and I heard this inaudible gasp next door, and the professor just hits the person on the shoulder. It's like, shh. And so that was pretty interesting. So yeah, do follow etiquette guidelines from your university professor.
Yeah. Like if you're going to be in some situation you're not familiar with, it's good if you can just ask someone, is there anything I need to watch out for?
When you're on the escalators in Osaka, queue on the right. When you're on the escalators in Tokyo, you queue on the left.
Well, except now you're not meant to walk on the escalators now. It's a big thing at the moment in Tokyo, right?
Oh, right. They want you to stand
on
still.
That's one bit of etiquette I don't
Oh, that's a
I
new
don't
thing.
follow,
Oh, there you go.
It's only just like the last few months, but now
what's that about?
I think it came from. I think I was actually researching London on the London Underground. That
It's quicker if
people stand.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't make any sense to me, but
no, it's the Guinness analogy of traffic. So if you have a certain volume of cars on the road, if they go slower, you don't have the phenomenon where cars at the front brake and you cause this ripple back and it slows. If actually all the cars drive slower overall, they'll get to their destination more quickly. And then I guess it's the same thing on the escalator. If you're trying to rush up the escalators, it jams everything. I'm not quite sure how it would work.
But I delight in, because I like to pretend I've got somewhere important to go. I never have anywhere important to go. But I like to pretend that I'm someone with places to go, and I whiz up the escalator. I think it's very funny.
Well, hey, listen, Matthew, we're coming up to an hour, so
this was going to be 15 minutes. You said we were going to do a 15-minute episode.
I lied. I'm terrible. Matthew, thank you so much for today.
It's been really fun. It's been really good for me to like just think of all this stuff. Right? This stuff is
useful, great.
Right?
No, this stuff is great, and actually, I'm learning a lot from your experiences too. Before,
let's do some more soon.
Let's do some more podcasts soon. Absolutely.
If we did these more regularly,
we could get more podcasts out. Yeah, no. Absolutely. Let's do more podcasts. We shall. Before we wrap this up, Matthew, where can people find you online? What website should people
So generally online, I'm at like Caramoon. So if you look Karamoon, I'm on Caramoon on Twitter and things like that. And you could even email me, gmail.com. If you go to matthewdons.com, so that's MATTHEWDONS, that forwards like a GoFundMe page about my trials and tribulations of having healthcare in Japan for cancer. And there's like videos you can watch and updates about my fun-filled, exciting life. But yeah, generally like Google Caramoon, and then you'll find I've got a YouTube channel and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, my YouTube channel, I have Japan-related stuff as well, often about hospitals in Japan, what to pack when a friend of mine, a doctor, recently watched my video on packing for Japan and for a Japanese hospital, and she said, Matthew, what kind of person packs lockpicks to go to a Japanese hospital? But for me, it was like, what? How would you not? Like you were saying before, flip around the question, why would you not take lockpicks if you're going to a hospital?
That's the first question that floated into my mind when I heard that.
Wi-Fi hacking gear. Because I thought, well, maybe on the last day I could hack the Wi-Fi and explore the network and stuff. I didn't, listeners. I packed up nicely and left early. So.
Well, good for you. Matthew, I would consider you a hacker in the hackerspace sense of the word, right?
Sure, yeah.
A hacker spacer. What would you refer to yourself as?
Yeah, I mean, I still, most days I'll do something kind of playing around using technology in ways that it was not intended. And yeah, I'm still involved in like some tech community stuff here in Tokyo, and yeah, getting restarting some of that again. I might do another bar camp soon.
Do another bar camp. It'd be awesome. Yeah. I remember the one we did many years ago. It was absolutely fantastic. And listen, what I'll do, Matthew, is
so one more thing is I mean, Japanese martial arts are a big thing. So maybe for me, so maybe we could do a Fun Friday soonish on Japanese for the martial arts, and again, all the etiquette of visiting the dojo.
100%. Let's do. I would love to do that. Yeah.
And it's, I mean, used for Japanese like body parts and adjectives and adverbs for like movement.
Let's do it. No, I would love to do that podcast.
Cool.
Yeah,
so
cool.
I should prepare that, and yeah, let's do some more.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew.
It was a pleasure.
I shall put links to all of Matthew's online goodness on the website for you to check out. Again, Matthew, thanks so much. It's great to see you again after all this time, and let's not make it too long since we...
Alex lives literally like 15 minutes from my 15 minutes.
I am a terrible friend. Well, Matthew, thanks a lot.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure.
And thank you, dear listener, for listening to this podcast. We shall see you very soon. So keep studying Japanese and take care. See you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.